What truly happens when loyalty collides with destiny on a tower high above the sleeping castle? The air bites with cold, torches flicker against stone, and somewhere in the dark, two minds sharpen like blades. You probably won't survive this, but you'll understand it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious. From which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk through the quiet corridors of Hogwarts, the castle breathing in long, sleepy sighs. Somewhere above, the portraits gossip in half-whispers about the red-haired girl who once almost brought ruin to this place. The stones remember everything, they just don't repeat it out loud. Ginny Weasley's name, once spoken in panic, now sits like dust on an old diary. You can almost imagine her, years ago, clutching that cursed book close to her chest as if it were a secret friend. There's something painfully human about trusting something that listens, even if it listens too well. Historians have written about cursed objects before. Everything from Tutankhamun's tomb to that allegedly haunted typewriter in Chicago, and yet no one can agree whether dark magic is possession or persuasion. You lean against the cold wall, half amused, half uneasy. Maybe Hogwarts was just another kind of museum, full of stories people preferred not to dust off. The air hums faintly, and you almost expect the diary to open again, a voice curling out like smoke, polite and patient. Somewhere between loyalty and naivety, Ginny became the castle's first quiet tragedy, and its first quiet survivor. Tonight, you're here to walk her path backwards, through whispers, guilt, and candlelight. The corridors smell faintly of parchment and candle soot as you follow the ghost of a memory through the dim light. Somewhere, a quill scratches, even though no one's writing. That's the problem with cursed diaries. They never stop telling their side of the story. You can almost hear it now, that soft voice coaxing a lonely 11-year-old into confessions she never meant to make. It's the kind of manipulation even muggles would recognize. In psychology, they call it grooming, though in magic it comes with a bit more flair and fewer therapy sessions. The diary didn't need power, it needed attention. Funny how the same thing drives both dark wizards and first-year students. Ginny Weasley, all freckles and trembling confidence, thought she'd found a friend in the margins. You can picture her hunched over the pages by candlelight, whispering about classes and crushes, unaware that every word gave Tom Riddle more of her warmth. The historians later argued over what truly happened inside the Chamber of Secrets. Was she fully possessed or partially aware? Did her will collapse, or did it just bend? Scholarly debate rages on, mostly among people who've never been manipulated by a teenage sociopath preserved in stationary form. A fringe theory even claims the diary itself wasn't a Horcrux at first, but became one when Ginny's emotions anchored it to reality. Kind of like when your favorite playlist starts to hurt. Still, in that year of whispers, Hogwarts didn't just host a monster, it hosted a metaphor. Every corridor, every shadowed stairwell reflected a young girl's struggle between fear and trust. You can almost smile at the irony. The castle built to protect children nearly destroyed one because it never thought to ask if diaries should have opinions. You find yourself descending, the castle's heartbeat slowing as you go deeper, past dripping stone and the faint echo of serpentine hisses that haven't truly faded. The Chamber of Secrets feels less like a place and more like an idea, something heavy and echoing that never quite dies. The torches along the walls flicker as though remembering. You imagine Ginny Weasley lying there, small and pale, her red hair fanned across the cold floor like spilled ink. Tom Riddle's shade had stood above her, smiling that polite, infuriating smile only people without bodies can afford. Scholars love to debate whether Riddle's apparition was truly conscious or just a projection of his preserved ambition. Personally, you suspect it doesn't matter. It's like arguing whether your reflection is alive when it starts smiling back. History books tell us that memory is unreliable, yet we've built entire institutions on it. In 1943, when the chamber was first opened, teachers called it myth. 50 years later, they called it history. Hogwarts moves on easily, but stones are patient listeners. You can still hear faint laughter, the kind that curls around guilt like ivy. Ginny must have woken up here, realizing she wasn't just a victim, but also a weapon, and that's the kind of realization that changes your laughter forever. You picture her returning to classes, smiling too quickly, pretending that nightmares are just bad dreams. People always underestimate how heavy survival can feel. Somewhere, a snake statue watches you, carved lips frozen in something between judgment and pity. One historical record notes that the basilisk eggs of medieval Europe were said to hatch only when warmed by dung, proof that monsters, magical or otherwise, are always born from something unpleasant. You chuckle softly because humor is the last defense against dread. Maybe that's why wizards invented chocolate frogs. You take a breath and imagine Tom's voice fading, his ghost collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance. Yet you can't help but wonder, did any part of him linger inside her, in dreams, in doubts, in the quiet corners of her mind? Historians argue possession ends when the object is destroyed, but philosophers counter that guilt is its own kind of Horcrux. Perhaps Ginny never truly left the chamber. She just learned to live above it. When you climb back up from the chamber, the castle's air feels thinner, as if it too has been holding its breath all these years. The Gryffindor common room is quiet now. Just the soft crackle of a dying fire and a chessboard left mid-game, pieces frozen like soldiers waiting for orders that will never come. You sit in the armchair nearest the window, the one Ginny used to curl into during her sleepless nights. From here, you can see the dark expanse of the Forbidden Forest, and for a fleeting second, it almost looks like it's leaning closer to listen. Ginny once told Hermione that sometimes she could still feel the diary's hum, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat she hadn't meant to borrow. Whether that's trauma, magic, or both remains a matter of scholarly argument, but most agree that ancient enchantments leave echoes, resonances that cling to people long after the spells are broken. It's the wizarding equivalent of a psychological scar, except that occasionally, your scar whispers. You smirk at the thought. Hogwarts would make an excellent case study for both the Ministry of Magic and a team of sleep-deprived therapists. Still, Ginny learned to carry the silence well. The common room became her testing ground, a space where she forced herself to laugh, to tease, to play, to feel normal. It's oddly human to rebuild yourself among the same walls that once watched you unravel. The portraits above the mantel probably pretended not to notice, though one of them, a retired witch with a fondness for embroidery, reportedly muttered, "That girl's braver than half the order ever was." Historians haven't verified the quote, but it sounds right. Across the wizarding world, firelight has always symbolized renewal. The Celts called it the soul's cleansing flame, while later wizards just called it cozy. You lean closer to the embers, half expecting to see her reflection there. Not the trembling first year, but the young woman who learned how to outstare the dark. The light flickers across the old armchairs, and for a moment, you could swear the castle exhales. Perhaps that's how Hogwarts apologizes, by keeping its survivors warm. And yet, somewhere behind the walls, something still stirs, a low hum that reminds you that not all echoes fade. Maybe that's what makes this story worth revisiting. The uneasy peace that follows victory, the quiet test of learning to live again. You chuckle softly, because honestly, healing is far less dramatic than fighting snakes. It's just harder to get applause for it. You wake to sunlight pouring through the Gryffindor windows, catching dust in golden suspension, and for a moment, it feels like Hogwarts itself is pretending nothing ever happened. Outside, the world is moving again. The owls swoop through pale morning mist, and laughter from the courtyard carries upward. Innocent, thoughtless, alive. Ginny Weasley steps into that same light, wearing the grin everyone has learned to love. A grin so practiced it could win Quidditch matches before she even picked up a broom. You watch her from the sidelines, a blur of red hair and effortless confidence. And if you didn't know better, you'd think she was born to chase light, not shadows. But you do know better. You've seen her handwriting tremble over a cursed diary. You've heard her voice crack in a chamber where echoes still hiss. The crowd around her cheers as she scores another goal, and someone yells her name with pride. She waves, she laughs, she exists. Yet beneath every cheer is a whisper, that quiet, unspoken line in Hogwarts gossip. That's the girl who opened the chamber. Nobody means it cruelly, not anymore, but whispers don't have to be cruel to linger. They just have to exist. She becomes the school's sweetheart because that's the only way to rewrite a tragedy. Turn it into triumph. Polish the memory until it gleams. She dates, she jokes, she wins matches, and each laugh is another stone in the wall she builds between who she was and who she wants to be. The professors call it resilience, the students call it charisma, and Fred and George just call it our sister scaring off half the castle. Humor is the Weasley family's oldest survival spell. One study in wizarding sociology, yes, that's a real field apparently, argues that humor thrives in households that frequently flirt with disaster. By that logic, the Burrow is practically a comedy club. You smile at the thought of Arthur tinkering with muggle plugs, while Ginny rolls her eyes, pretending not to worry about what's still coiled somewhere inside her chest. You follow her through the corridors again, this time not as the cursed child, but as the captain, the leader, the girl who knows every creaking stair and every drafty window by heart. Her Quidditch broom becomes her sword, the pitch becomes her battlefield. There's something almost mythic about it, an unintentional echo of warrior women across history. You remember reading about the Scythian Amazons, how historians argued for centuries whether they were real or propaganda. Archaeology later found graves filled with weapons beside women's bones, confirming that myth and truth sometimes share a pillow. Ginny might not ride horses through the steppe, but she does fly with the same defiance. The crowd roars, the wind tears at her hair, and in that instant, she's untouchable. Still, the victory doesn't erase what came before. It just reframes it, like painting sunlight over a scar and calling it art. After the match, she sits by the lake, wand tapping absent-mindedly against her knee. The water reflects clouds like thoughts that refuse to settle. She once wrote that she could feel the castle hum beneath her, an echo, a low rhythm that isn't quite gone. Maybe Hogwarts hums for everyone, maybe it's just her imagination, or maybe certain places remember their secrets better than others. The debate over magical memory charms suggests that environments can absorb residual emotion, essentially, that walls have moods. You wonder what mood the chamber is in today. Somewhere deep below where the basilisk's bones rest in stillness, a flicker of old magic probably shivers at her name. You can't help but joke that it's the wizarding world's version of bad Wi-Fi. Signals keep bouncing long after the device is dead. As the sun lowers, you notice her watching Harry across the courtyard. He laughs with Ron, carefree, unaware that his mere existence makes her pulse quicken and her guilt ache. She's not the type for melodrama, but you can tell she sometimes wonders if love is redemption or just another form of possession. That's the tragedy of trauma. It teaches you to question even tenderness. Scholars of magical psychology, another underfunded department at St. Mungo's, still debate whether survivors of cursed influence develop residual empathy for dark magic. In simpler terms, once you've been listened to by evil, you can recognize its tone anywhere. Ginny laughs anyway. She chooses joy the way knights once chose death in battle, consciously, defiantly, beautifully. At dinner, the great hall glows with warmth, the kind that smells faintly of roasted pumpkin and second chances. She tells a joke about Snape's expression during last week's potion accident, and even Hermione nearly spits her drink. Laughter fills the room, that strange collective spell that can momentarily erase history. You could argue that Hogwarts has always been powered by laughter. It's the only thing that stops it from becoming a mausoleum. But as the candles float above her, you see Ginny glance up, her eyes flicking toward the enchanted ceiling as if searching for something unseen. Maybe she's checking for cracks in the illusion. Maybe she's reminding herself the stars are still real, even when painted on a ceiling. Later that night, she returns to her dormitory, the other girls already asleep. The room smells like lavender and parchment and faint candle smoke. She sits at her desk, opens her journal. Not a cursed one this time, just leather and lined pages, and begins to write. Not confessions, not pleas for friendship, just small fragments of life. What Harry said at breakfast, how Fred's joke backfired, how the lake looked almost silver this afternoon. Ordinary things. Healing, as it turns out, hides in ordinary things. She pauses, then doodles a little lightning bolt at the corner of the page and immediately crosses it out, rolling her eyes at herself. Pathetic, she probably whispers with a grin. You can't help but laugh with her. After all, sarcasm is a Weasley birthright. From the window, moonlight spills across her desk, turning ink to silver. Somewhere below, the lake reflects that same moon, quiet, patient, forgiving. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the castle murmuring in its sleep. It doesn't apologize, but it doesn't forget. Ginny leans back, eyes half closed, and for a heartbeat, she isn't the girl from the chamber or the golden Quidditch star. She's just someone breathing, alive, unpossessed. Historians like to say time heals all wounds, but you've read enough to know that's not true. Time only covers them in prettier wallpaper. Still, there's something admirable in her refusal to hide. The world expected fragility. She delivered fire instead. As the candle burns lower, she closes the journal, touches her wand to her temple, and mutters a charm to erase the last line she wrote. Sometimes I still dream of him. It's not denial, it's housekeeping. You smile because even heroes need to tidy up their nightmares. Downstairs, the fire in the common room sighs, and the castle settles into its familiar rhythm. Tomorrow, Ginny will wake early, smile like nothing ever happened, and win another match. But tonight, in this soft in-between, she's both haunted and whole. And if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the diary's final whisper, not from malice this time, but from memory. Thank you for surviving me. You chuckle softly, because really, isn't that the best revenge? To live loudly after something tried to silence you. You always know when a mystery refuses to die. It starts whispering through the cracks of history books, hiding in the footnotes, waiting for someone curious enough to notice. That's where Ginny's name begins to reappear, not as a scandal, but as a pattern. You leaf through old magical journals, the kind that smell faintly of dust and ink and academic ego, and there it is again. The prophecy in the dust. Some say it was nothing more than rumor, a misinterpreted omen buried in the archives of the Department of Mysteries. Others swear it tied the Weasley line to ancient blood magic older than Hogwarts itself. You lean closer, amused by how wizarding historians always manage to turn family gossip into destiny. Still, the theory persists that Ginny was never just an innocent caught in Tom Riddle's curse, but something of a catalyst, a spark destined to challenge the shadow long before she ever opened a diary. It sounds dramatic, of course. Everything does when it's written in retrospect. But if you trace her ancestry far enough, through old wizarding families and their conveniently missing records, you find peculiar patterns. A witch named Ginevra Prewitt, born in the 1600s, rumored to have bound her soul to protect others through acts of self-sacrifice. Another from the 12th century, a red-haired seer who predicted the downfall of a dark lord, born of lies and serpents. Coincidence? Probably. Then again, history has a strange sense of humor. You chuckle, imagining the Weasleys sitting at their kitchen table, completely unaware that their family tree may read like a low-budget prophecy scroll. Arthur would probably ask if it could be unplugged and plugged back in again. Still, it explains something. The strange way Ginny always seemed to attract power, even when she didn't want it. After the diary incident, professors noted unusual magical surges around her. Nothing dangerous, just heightened. When she got emotional, candles flared. When she focused too long, objects shifted slightly, as if magic were leaning toward her. Scholars call this residual Horcrux affinity, a lingering connection to parasitic enchantments. But there's another quirkier school of thought proposed by a wizarding folklorist named Eldrick Hawthorne, who believed that ancient magic clings not to trauma, but to potential. Power recognizes power, he wrote, and guilt is often mistaken for destiny. It's an appealing idea, that what cursed her might have also awakened her. You can't help but grin at the irony. Ginny Weasley, unknowingly upgraded by dark magic. It's the wizarding equivalent of getting bit by a radioactive diary. When you think about it, the world has always loved these narratives. The cursed child who becomes the chosen one, the villain's victim who turns into a hero's equal. Mythology recycles them endlessly. In Greek legend, Cassandra was blessed with prophecy, but cursed to be ignored. In the wizarding world, Ginny's curse was memory. Everyone remembered her darkest chapter, but no one quite knew how to read it. You wander through the Hogwarts library now, tracing the spines of books she once might have touched. Somewhere between Horcrux containment strategies and runic resonance in emotional states, a half-torn note flutters loose. The handwriting is hers, rounded, precise. Magic doesn't forgive, it adapts. You stare at it longer than you should. Maybe that's the truth of her story. It isn't about redemption, but adaptation. She didn't defeat her curse. She outgrew it. By her 6th year, the rumors had changed tone. The younger students whispered that she could hex you before you blinked, and they weren't wrong. Harry, oblivious as usual, took months to realize that the girl he'd once rescued could now rescue herself. There's something poetic about that, though Ginny would probably find the poetry annoying. She always had little patience for sentimentality. People act like trauma's a personality, she once joked in an interview with the Daily Prophet years later. I just wanted to play Quidditch. The Prophet cut that line, of course. Newspapers prefer redemption arcs to resilience. Still, Hogwarts corridors have long memories, and it didn't take much for old whispers to revive. One night, during a thunderstorm, a faint hum echoed through the lower halls, the same pitch the chamber once carried. Students panicked, owls scattered, and for a few moments, everyone thought history was looping. But when they sent a team to investigate, all they found was Ginny, alone in the empty corridor, wand drawn, standing exactly where the floor had once caved in decades before. "It's just the pipes," she'd said with a smirk. "The castle likes to be dramatic." You can almost hear her tone, half jest, half challenge. Maybe she wasn't just reassuring them. Maybe she was reassuring herself. Some modern magical theorists have started calling this phenomenon echo anxiety, the magical equivalent of PTSD, where latent energy in old locations triggers sympathetic reactions in those attuned to it. One fascinating study even compared magical echo patterns at Hogwarts to haunted battlefield sites in the Muggle world. It turns out trauma leaves residue everywhere, whether it's the stones of a castle or the mind of a young witch. And yet, Ginny never ran from it. She walked those halls daily, past the same walls, the same archways, the same shadows that once almost devoured her. It's as if she refused to give the darkness the satisfaction of owning her fear. You smile quietly, because that's the kind of bravery no prophecy ever celebrates, the ordinary kind. Of course, no good historical analysis is complete without wild speculation, and here's where it gets entertaining. Some wizards claim Dumbledore knew all along that Ginny's encounter with the diary wasn't an accident. They say the headmaster believed ancient forces were converging, old magic balancing itself after Voldemort's first downfall. Sounds like a convenient excuse for terrible school security, doesn't it? Still, it raises an interesting question. Was Ginny chosen, or did she simply choose not to stay broken? Scholars still argue this point in conferences with titles like The Ethics of Destiny, a retrospective on adolescent sorcery. Tickets are free, but you must bring your own wand sanitizer. You sit back and consider it. Maybe all of this, the diary, the chamber, the hum, the prophecy, wasn't about fate at all. Maybe it was about a single stubborn girl who refused to let someone else write her ending. And that's the part history always misses. Because historians chase grand narratives, not quiet defiance. They'll write about Ginny's future achievements, her victories, her marriage, her fame. But none of that explains the strength it took to walk back into the same castle that nearly killed her and act like the floor was just fine. You chuckle softly. She's the kind of person who'd fix the chamber's plumbing herself out of spite. If you're honest, that's what makes her fascinating. She's not a saint, not a prophecy fulfilled, just a young woman who learned how to turn curse residue into character. That's rarer than any spell you'll find in those dusty tomes. You can almost hear her voice now, steady, slightly amused. Stop overanalyzing me. I was 11, and yet, somehow, that 11-year-old outsmarted the ghost of the most dangerous dark wizard in history. Maybe prophecy doesn't need to be divine. Maybe it just needs to be determined. As the night deepens, the castle quiets again. You glance toward the forbidden forest, where lightning flickers distantly between trees. Somewhere out there, something ancient stirs, the world reminding you that no story ever really ends, it just changes chapters. You smile to yourself, closing the dusty volume of magical history in your lap. Ginny's shadow isn't darkness anymore. It's memory, and memory, like magic, adapts. Maybe that's the real prophecy after all, that what haunts you today becomes what strengthens you tomorrow. And if you think about it long enough, even cursed diaries start to sound like life coaches. You find her again, not in a castle corridor or on a Quidditch pitch this time, but sitting cross-legged at a worn wooden desk, parchment scattered around like confetti of unfinished thoughts. The words on the page are raw, hesitant, almost human in their imperfection. These are the unwritten letters to Harry, the ones she'll never send, the ones she folds into smaller and smaller squares until they disappear inside a drawer that no one ever opens. Each letter begins the same way. I know you're busy saving the world, but... and ends in silence. You can almost hear her exhale between the sentences, that tiny surrender that says, I wish I could tell you this without sounding like someone from a prophecy. But she doesn't. Instead, she writes about the ordinary, how the rain smells different this year, how Crookshanks has adopted a new attitude of silent judgment, how her wand sometimes sparks when she isn't looking. The little things that keep a person tethered to life when the weight of history sits on their shoulders. It's strange how love works after tragedy. People talk about it as if it's soft and curative, but it's mostly awkward, like trying to dance while wearing armor. Ginny's affection for Harry isn't the infatuation of a girl from a novel. It's survival rebranded as romance. He understands pieces of her story, but not the whole. He's fought death, but never been possessed by it. Sometimes when he looks at her, she wonders if he's seeing her or seeing the memory of the girl he saved. There's a difference, and she feels it every time his eyes linger a beat too long. Scholars have compared post-trauma relationships among wizards to Muggle war veterans' marriages. They share the same fragile rhythm, the same quiet competition between love and memory. One historian even wrote that affection after darkness is just two people pretending they're not afraid of the light. You smile grimly. It's the kind of theory only someone who's never loved could publish. One of the letters breaks pattern. It doesn't begin with Harry's name, but with her own. Dear Ginny, please stop apologizing to ghosts. It's part confession, part joke, part therapy. She writes that she still dreams about the chamber sometimes, but in the dream, she's the one standing over Tom Riddle this time, wand steady, voice calm. She doesn't wake up terrified anymore, just tired. You imagine her smirking at her own melodrama, then doodling a snitch in the margin to cancel out the sentiment. Humor, as always, her way of taking power back. Anthropologists studying medieval Europe once noted that survivors of plague often wrote letters to saints they didn't believe in. It was less about religion and more about needing someone who'd listen without interrupting. Ginny's letter served the same purpose, divine voicemail, with no expectation of a reply. One evening, she slips one of the letters into the fireplace. The parchment curls, the ink liquefies into blue smoke, and she whispers, "Thank you for saving me, but I've got it from here." The flames answer with a pop, as if the universe just gave its blessing. There's something beautifully defiant about it. Some would call it closure. Others might say it's just well-timed arson. Either way, it's progress. You think about how wizards always frame emotional growth as a kind of spell work, transfiguration of pain into purpose. Maybe that's why she later becomes a writer for the Daily Prophet. Storytelling, after all, is the most respectable form of exorcism. Years later, when interviewers ask her about her teenage years, she jokes about them like they were mildly inconvenient weather. I was cursed once, she'll say. But who wasn't? The audience laughs, charmed by her wit, never realizing that humor was her armor long before she wore Gryffindor red. You can almost picture Harry groaning beside her, muttering something about tact, and Ginny replying, "If I don't laugh about it, someone else will." It's hard not to adore that kind of honesty. Even Dumbledore once wrote that laughter is the last true proof of free will. Granted, he also once kept a lethal snake under a school, so maybe don't quote him at therapy. In her later letters, the ones she never writes but mentally rehearses, you hear a new tone, calmer, less self-conscious. She's not writing to Harry anymore. She's writing to herself, to the younger version who thought survival meant pretending. She writes, "You can stop smiling all the time now. No one's watching, it's safe, and you can almost feel the relief ripple through time, a conversation across years between two versions of the same soul." Historians rarely quote diary fragments like that because they aren't grand enough. They prefer battles and bloodlines, not bedtime confessions. But sometimes the smallest sentence carries the loudest truth. There's one particularly odd theory floating in magical academia, the emotional resonance hypothesis, which suggests that written emotions, especially when tied to magical trauma, can influence probability. Essentially, feelings are spells in disguise. You laugh at the idea, but part of you wonders if it's true. Maybe Ginny's unsent letters shaped her future more than prophecy ever did. Maybe every word of forgiveness she scribbled rewired fate a little. Muggles have psychology, wizards have narrative symmetry. Either way, both seem to agree that naming your pain makes it smaller. By her final year at Hogwarts, Ginny has stopped writing letters altogether. She doesn't need to. The castle has become her archive, each hallway a chapter, each echo a line she's already rewritten. When she passes the entrance to the chamber, there's no shiver anymore, just a nod, like greeting an old classmate you've finally outgrown. The ghosts don't follow her these days. They simply watch as she laughs too loudly in the Great Hall, as she sneaks butterbeer into study hours, as she flies with reckless grace above the pitch. In a way, every laugh, every cheer, every sarcastic remark is a new letter to herself, one that begins not with apology, but with triumph. You look down at the pages of her earlier writing, those trembling sentences about fear and shame, and realize they've faded, not magically, but because time has worn them soft. Maybe that's what real healing looks like, not erasure, but gentle blur. The past still exists, but its edges aren't sharp enough to cut anymore. Historians argue whether such transformation counts as redemption. Philosophers counter that redemption implies guilt, and perhaps all Ginny ever needed was permission to stop feeling guilty for surviving. The debate remains unresolved, though one bold researcher published a paper titled "Resilience as a Form of Spellcraft." He argued that every act of recovery is, by definition, an act of magic. You grin because that feels right. Outside, dawn seeps across the grounds, and the castle awakens with a low hum. You imagine Ginny standing at the window, watching the sun rise, thinking, not about destiny, not about Harry, not even about what the world expects, but about breakfast. That's her secret power, really, grounding the epic in the mundane. You can almost hear her laugh when you try to make her story sound profound. It wasn't profound, she'd say. It was Tuesday. And yet, that's the point. Every ordinary day she lived became a quiet victory over the darkness that once borrowed her heartbeat. You close the invisible drawer where her letters rest, now ashes or memories or both, and take a long breath. If this were a fairy tale, the moral would be that love heals all wounds. But this isn't a fairy tale. It's history with candlelight and sarcasm. So maybe the real lesson is simpler. Sometimes survival itself is the love story. The burrow smells of cinnamon, smoke, and something faintly electrical, like a spell that's still cooling off. You're sitting at the kitchen table again, the one that's seen every argument, every joke, every confession in the Weasley family history. The afternoon light filters through the crooked windows, turning dust into gold. Ginny is laughing, that warm, practiced laugh that manages to sound effortless and defensive at the same time. Around her, plates scrub themselves in the sink, Gnomes wrestle in the garden, and Molly Weasley hums as if music itself could keep the chaos from spilling over. To any visitor, this looks like domestic perfection. But you, who have followed her shadows, know that even laughter has a structure. Every sound that leaves her lips is built like a spell, equal parts control, charm, and camouflage. The burrow's walls are alive with memories. Fred's echo still drifts through the rafters sometimes, though no one says it out loud. Arthur pretends not to notice, tinkering with a toaster that will eventually explode, and Ginny fills the silence before it can settle. It's a family tradition, talking louder than grief. At dinner, she teases George about his terrible haircut and Ron about his table manners. Everyone laughs, even when the jokes aren't that funny. There's something heroic about it, turning ordinary meals into rituals of resilience. The Weasleys have always survived by turning disaster into punchlines. Scholars of magical anthropology once pointed out that humor in wizarding families acts as a warding charm against despair. You can imagine them sitting around a conference table, citing the Weasleys as case study number 7. Domestic laughter and emotional alchemy. You grin at the thought because they're right. Each burst of laughter in this house is another act of rebellion against the world that tried to break them. Ginny's laugh, though, carries an undertone no one else hears, a low hum of memory that surfaces between words. Maybe it's the chamber, maybe it's just time. Healing doesn't erase the hum, it teaches you how to harmonize with it. When night falls, the burrow creaks like an old ship. Wind pushes against the crooked walls, and the ghoul in the attic resumes his nightly percussion solo. Ginny sits by the fireplace, pretending to read the prophet, but mostly staring at the flames. She doesn't like to admit it, but silence still unnerves her. It's too much like the pause between Tom Riddle's sentences, that deliberate patience of something pretending to listen. So she fills it with laughter, with chores, with movement. She helps her mother mend robes, she visits Andromeda to babysit Teddy Lupin, she hosts Quidditch practices that end in chaotic mud fights. Everyone calls it energy, she knows it's strategy. You think of a fringe psychological theory, once proposed by a healer at St. Mungo's. Survivor, overcompensation behavior. The idea is that those who faced possession or mind control develop an instinct to stay over-involved in life, as if they're daring the world to keep up. It's not pathology, it's passion turned defensive. Ginny could write the textbook on it. Sometimes late at night she and George sit outside beneath the stars, trading half-finished thoughts. He jokes less now, his laughter thinner but still genuine. They talk about Fred in that easy, unflinching way only siblings can. "Do you ever feel him?" George asks once. Ginny shrugs. "Sometimes," she says, "when the room gets too quiet." It's the most honest answer she's given in months. The stars above them flicker, not because of magic, but because the atmosphere's turbulent tonight. You remember reading somewhere that the Romans believed stars were holes in heaven, small tears through which the gods watched human stubbornness. If that's true, the gods must love this family. The next morning, the burrow comes alive again. Molly scolding, Arthur tinkering, the twins' old prank gear mysteriously reactivated by a mischievous poltergeist. Ginny moves through it all like a conductor, guiding chaos into rhythm. She's always been the quiet center of motion, the unspoken axis around which the family steadies itself. People rarely notice it, but you do. Every family has that one person whose calm is contagious, even when they're not calm themselves. A healer once said that such people act as emotional anchors, their presence literally dampening magical static in tense rooms. The ministry still denies the existence of such empathy-based magic. But then again, the ministry denies a lot of things. In the afternoons, she visits the local Quidditch pitch to train younger players. She's fierce, sarcastic, and impossible to impress. If you can't fly straight, she tells a nervous first year, then at least fall dramatically. The girl laughs, cheeks red, and tries again. Ginny watches with that same sharp focus she used to have when facing bludgers and basilisks alike. Teaching suits her. The same patience that once got her through fear now steadies others through failure. You wonder if she ever realizes how much of her power lies not in spells or broomsticks, but in her ability to make courage contagious. Some wizards conquer darkness by slaying monsters. Ginny conquers it by convincing everyone else they can, too. But even courage needs somewhere to rest. One evening, you find her on the hill behind the burrow, watching the sun sink into a tangle of trees. The fields smell of wild thyme and old magic, the kind that doesn't come from wands but from the earth itself. She lies back in the grass, arms crossed under her head, eyes half closed. For a rare moment, she looks utterly still. "I think I used to be afraid of silence," she says softly, though no one's around to answer. "Now I think it's just another kind of music." You can almost hear it, the quiet hum of wind, the crackle of distant broomsticks, the heartbeat of someone who's finally stopped running from herself. It's strange how normal this scene feels compared to the chaos she's lived through. Maybe that's the secret of the Weasley mask of normalcy. It isn't denial, but devotion. They treat peace like a spell that must be constantly maintained. Every dinner, every laugh, every repaired toaster is an act of protection. Historians often underestimate the magic of ordinary persistence. They'll write essays about epic duels and forget that real endurance looks like doing dishes while grief hovers in the doorway. One particularly poetic historian once called the Weasleys the heartbeat of post-war wizarding Britain. You'd laugh at the sentimentality if it weren't so accurate. Later that night, Ginny writes in her journal again, just one sentence this time. "Today, I didn't think about him at all." She stares at the words for a long time before closing the book. Healing, she's learned, isn't linear, it's circular. Some days, she's fine. Other days, she's still that girl in the chamber, clutching a diary that listens too well. But more often now, she's just Ginny, sister, daughter, athlete, survivor. She snuffs out the candle, curls up under her blanket, and lets the darkness be just darkness again. Outside, the wind carries the faintest echo of laughter from the house, layered with years of memories. The burrow sighs like an old friend, its mismatched walls leaning comfortably into one another. You realize that maybe this family's real magic isn't bravery or humor, it's endurance disguised as chaos. They never rebuilt the burrow properly because it never needed perfection. It just needed to keep standing. So did she. You smile to yourself as the embers in the fireplace glow one last time. In another part of the world, scholars are still debating whether residual dark energy can ever truly fade. But here, in this messy, wonderful house, that debate feels irrelevant. The shadows have already learned to coexist with laughter. And maybe that's the truest kind of peace, the kind that doesn't erase the past, just teaches it better table manners. History doesn't always announce when it's shifting. It happens quietly while people are too busy living. You see that truth in Ginny Weasley's next chapter. The war ends, the castle rebuilds, and the world starts pretending to be normal again. In The Prophet, she's no longer the girl once possessed by you-know-who's memory. She's Ginny Weasley, rising Quidditch star. That's progress, even if it's just rebranding. You stand in the stands of Holyhead's wind-blasted stadium, watching her in emerald green robes, hair whipping behind her like fire in motion. There's no trace of the child from the chamber here, only precision and joy disguised as aggression. Every dive, every curve, every feint feels like a refusal to be defined by her past. It's the kind of athletic vengeance no therapist could prescribe. The crowd roars as she scores again, and you swear you can feel Hogwarts itself cheering somewhere in the background, proud of the survivor it almost buried. After the game, reporters swarm her. "What drives you?" one shouts. She grins, sweat and sunlight mingling across her freckles. "Gravity," she says. The crowd laughs, but you can hear the subtext. She's always been pulled between worlds, earth and sky, guilt and grace. Later that night, she gives an interview for Witch Weekly, sitting cross-legged on a broom trunk, hair still damp. "People think strength means forgetting," she tells them. It doesn't. It just means remembering differently. That line becomes famous, quoted endlessly by self-help authors and defense professors. A fringe philosopher even cites her in a paper called The Ethics of Endurance, arguing that Ginny Weasley represents post-traumatic empowerment through embodied flight. You smile at how seriously academics take their metaphors, but still, you can't deny the poetry of it. Her fame grows fast. Children ask for her autograph, couples name their daughters after her, and entire Quidditch fan clubs print badges reading "Fly like Ginny, fall like gravity." Somewhere in all that applause, she learns to balance gratitude with mild exhaustion. The wizarding world loves its heroes, but it especially loves the ones who survive tragedy. It makes redemption feel achievable by proxy. She obliges, smiling, posing, pretending not to notice how journalists always circle back to the chamber. "Do you still dream about it?" they ask. "Only when someone brings it up," she replies deadpan. 3 light jokes per interview, 1 historical allusion to show she's grounded, and 1 pointed question turned aside with charm. She's perfected the art of survival PR. In quieter moments, when the flashbulbs fade, she visits the ruins of Hogwarts during reconstruction. The stones have been scrubbed clean, the chamber sealed again, but she still feels its hum beneath her shoes. "You don't have to be haunted," Hermione once told her. "You can be historical instead." Ginny liked that distinction. Historians, after all, don't flinch at ghosts. They catalog them. She runs her fingers along the carved serpents on the wall, their eyes dull and harmless now. "You've been demoted," she whispers, smirking. Somewhere deep below, the silence feels less like menace and more like respect. Perhaps even basilisks know when to rest. The wizarding press calls her the Iron Phoenix of the Pitch, which sounds flattering until you realize how much the metaphor relies on rebirth. She sometimes jokes that she's tired of being reborn. Once, at a charity gala for war orphans, she delivers a speech so honest it stuns the crowd. "Everyone says I'm brave," she begins, "but bravery isn't something you wake up feeling. It's something you do because the other options are worse." The room goes still. You survive, then people call it courage afterward. It's the sort of truth that lingers long after the applause ends. Somewhere, you imagine McGonagall raising a glass quietly from a corner table, proud, but pretending not to be sentimental. As her fame settles into legend, Ginny starts writing. Not journalism this time. Fiction. Her first book, The Hollow Ink, is a thinly disguised retelling of her diary years, though she swears it's purely metaphorical. Critics call it haunting, layered, and shockingly funny for a trauma narrative. One reviewer writes, "She turns possession into punchline without ever trivializing pain." You think that might be the most accurate summary of her life so far. The novel becomes a bestseller, translated into 10 languages, taught in Defense Against the Dark Arts classes as both cautionary tale and emotional resilience guide. Muggle readers even embrace it, calling it post-Gothic feminist fantasy. You grin because she'd hate that label. Between book tours and matches, she returns to the Burrow less often, though her room remains untouched. Quidditch posters slightly peeling, the faint scent of ink still on the desk. Molly never says it out loud, but you know she checks the room weekly, straightening the sheets as if order could substitute for presence. Ginny teases her about it whenever she visits. "Mum, if you polish my broom one more time, it'll develop a superiority complex." Molly just hugs her tighter. That's the thing about Weasleys. They say, "I love you" through manual labor and unsolicited stew. One day, in Diagon Alley, she passes Flourish and Blots and notices a small display in the window. The Diary of Tom Riddle. Annotated analysis of a Horcrux case. Someone has written an entire book about her trauma, footnotes and all. She steps inside, flips through a few pages, and laughs, quietly but sincerely. "Everyone wants to own your story," she mutters. "Might as well charge admission." Then she buys every copy on the shelf and donates them to St. Mungo's with a note. For patients who think they're defined by their worst chapter, that's Ginny, revenge through philanthropy. In the wizarding world's collective mythology, she eventually becomes a symbol of persistence, though she never quite agrees with the title. "Symbols are boring," she tells Luna once over tea. "They stop moving." Luna just smiles dreamily and says, "But you're a moving symbol." Like the moon, Ginny laughs until she nearly spills her tea. "If I'm the moon, then you're the whole constellation." Somewhere, the ghosts of Hogwarts probably cheer again. Luna and Ginny, proof that madness and clarity can share tea comfortably. Decades later, historians continue to debate her legacy. Was she the accidental heir to an ancient prophecy? A psychological case study in resilience? Or just a clever girl who refused to be anyone's victim twice? The arguments fill symposiums and scholarly journals, complete with diagrams and citations. You skim one titled, "Residual Soul Imprint in Adolescent Possession Survivors, the Weasley Hypothesis." It concludes that Ginny's strength may represent a unique intersection of magical heredity and cognitive resistance. You close the article and laugh softly. Academia has a way of turning miracles into spreadsheets. And yet, none of that analysis captures what you see now. An older Ginny, hair streaked with silver, standing in her garden beside a broom planted like a scarecrow, her children chasing enchanted bubbles across the yard. She's still fierce, still funny, but calmer. When her youngest asks if the stories about the chamber are true, she smiles. "Yes, love, but they're also over." Then she winks. "Well, mostly." You can feel the circle closing, not with a bang, but with a wink and a laugh. That's how real history ends. Quietly, almost playfully. As the evening deepens, you notice how easily she moves through her home, as if every corner knows her footsteps. You realize the shadow of Ginny Weasley was never about darkness at all. It was about depth, the part of her that absorbed everything: fear, loss, love, and came out luminous. Some philosophers argue that the soul expands around pain like scar tissue around a wound, stronger than before. Maybe that's what she's done. Turn the hollow place inside her into room for more life. When night falls, she sits outside again, quill in hand, writing one last note, not to Harry, not to herself, but to whoever will find her story next. It reads simply, "You're not what hurt you, you're what survived." She seals it with wax, tucks it into an old book, and smiles. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots, and the world hums softly, as if in agreement. You take a slow breath and let the scene fade, because there's nothing left to add. History has already decided her place, but legends like Ginny Weasley don't live in books. They live in the quiet courage of everyone who reads them. Hogwarts always smells the same in autumn: damp parchment, old dust, and the faint sweetness of pumpkin wax. You arrive long after the students have gone to bed, guided only by torchlight and the occasional whisper from a portrait that remembers you. The castle has aged kindly. Its scars have become architecture. Ginny Weasley steps through the corridor leading to the restricted archives, wand raised, robes brushing the floor like memory itself. The Ministry gave her permission to research post-Horcrux magical residue, but she suspects they only agreed because they assumed she'd write something inspirational. Instead, she's hunting ghosts, the kind made of ink and intent. The door groans open to reveal shelves that never end, scrolls glowing faintly where preservation charms hum. She moves carefully, fingers tracing spines of forgotten journals. One is marked 1943, Chamber Incidents. Another simply says, Possession Studies, Preliminary. She laughs softly. Preliminary, she mutters. Always is. Humor still arrives on cue. It's her lifelong survival reflex. A spider the size of a teaspoon lowers itself from the ceiling. "Hello, Aragog's grand something," she says, stepping aside. The spider, apparently flattered, retreats. You can't help but smile. Ginny Weasley negotiating a truce with everything that once terrified her. At the center of the archive lies a single table lit by a hovering orb. On it rests a small, sealed chest labeled Recovered Artifacts. Second floor collapse. Year 2. She hesitates. You realize this might be the last remaining fragment of the diary, neutralized decades ago, but never destroyed completely. Historians had argued for years whether it should be preserved as evidence or erased to ensure peace. They loved their relics, she says quietly. As long as they belong to someone else's pain. She opens the chest. Inside, a shard of blackened leather, edges curled like a burnt leaf, humming faintly in the air. Not dangerous, just alive in memory. For a long moment, she simply watches it. Then she sits and begins to write. Her quill scratches across the parchment like a heartbeat. Artifact, diary fragment, residual aura stable, sensation, familiar. She pauses. Emotional response, irritation. She laughs again. You still owe me an apology. The orb flickers as if amused. She leans closer. You know, Tom, for someone who claimed to hate love, you spent an awful lot of time trying to earn devotion. The shard remains silent, but the air around it vibrates gently, like a sigh. Perhaps memory recognizes its maker's name. You think about how historians once claimed magic was linear, cast, act, fade. But Ginny's discovery proves otherwise. Emotions linger like echoes, circling back through generations. There's even a niche theory, echo-resonant thaumaturgy, that argues spells acquire personality through the people they touch. A dry academic way of saying what every child already knows. Toys remember who played with them. She writes a note in the margin. If pain can echo, so can forgiveness. It's an unintentional thesis statement for her entire life. Hours pass. Dust gathers around the lamp's halo. Somewhere outside, the lake slaps gently against the shore. She closes the notebook, stretches, and walks between shelves stacked with centuries of secrets. You can sense the castle responding, its wards shifting like an exhale. Hogwarts has always loved her. Maybe this is its way of saying goodnight. On one shelf, she finds an old Quidditch manual she'd once borrowed and never returned. Advanced chaser formations. She grins. Guess I owe you a library fine, she says to no one. The portrait of an elderly librarian huffs from its frame. Technically, yes, Ginny winks. Add it to my legend. As she leaves, she glances back at the chest. The fragment lies still now, dull, harmless. She murmurs, "Stay quiet, yeah?" The world's earned its sleep. For once, the silence feels final. Outside, the corridor opens toward the astronomy tower. She steps out into the night air, cool and silver, the stars sharp as quills. From here, the black lake gleams like ink spilled across parchment. She remembers the girl who once stood on this very tower, trembling between guilt and fear. The same wind brushes her hair, but this time it carries no ghosts. Below, the castle lights flicker like steady heartbeats, living proof that darkness can become structure if you let it. You realize this moment isn't about closure, it's about comprehension. There's no grand revelation, no hidden prophecy uncovered. Just a woman who has finally learned that understanding is quieter than victory. She looks up at the constellations and whispers something only the night can hear. You don't have to be brilliant to survive, just persistent. The stars seem to nod, as if academia and astronomy have finally agreed on something. On her way back, she passes a group of students sneaking chocolate past curfew. 10 points from Gryffindor, she says dryly. They freeze until she grins. Kidding, but share. They laugh, relieved, and she walks on, leaving behind only the faint sound of mirth echoing down the corridor. For a castle that once held screams, laughter is the most powerful magic imaginable. By the time she reaches the main hall, dawn is already brushing the windows pale. She pauses, watching the light crawl across the marble floor, illuminating the cracks and the polished repairs. Perfectly imperfect, she says softly. Then she turns, footsteps fading toward the exit, where history gives way to mourning. Behind her, the archives settle into silence again, except perhaps for a single, almost imperceptible sigh from a burnt shard finally ready to rest. Names carry gravity. In the wizarding world, they're practically spells, soft syllables that can summon memory, pride, or guilt with equal force. You notice this first when Ginny Weasley corrects a reporter who calls her Mrs. Potter. She smiles, polite but sharp. Ginny Weasley is fine, she says, and though the tone is casual, it carries an entire manifesto. Identity isn't a costume she wears for someone else's comfort. She's been defined by too many names already: the possessed girl, the youngest Weasley, the chosen boy's love interest. She has earned her own line in history's ledger. At home, the children's laughter fills the air like magic that doesn't need a wand. James crashes a toy broom into the wall again. Lily insists she'll be a seeker, and Albus, quiet and wide-eyed, listens more than he speaks. You can almost see the reflection of both parents in each gesture: Harry's curiosity, Ginny's mischief, their shared exhaustion. Parenting, she's learned, is just another battle with prophecy. Everyone expects the Potter children to shine like lightning bolts. Ginny's goal is simpler: to teach them to be ordinary when they want to be. Ordinary is the truest kind of peace. One afternoon, she finds Albus sitting under a tree, reading The Hollow Ink, her own novel. "You're not supposed to read that yet," she says, mock stern. "Mum, you wrote it," he replies. "It's not about you," she adds quickly, which is, of course, exactly what someone who wrote about herself would say. He studies her for a moment. "Was it scary?" he asks quietly. "Being inside someone else's magic?" She considers, then nods. "Terrifying. But the worst part was realizing how easily I trusted it." He nods slowly, absorbing the lesson like oxygen. The world will tell him bravery is about fighting monsters. His mother knows it's about recognizing when the monster sounds like your own thoughts. Later, at the Burrow, Molly fusses over dinner while Arthur explains, again, why Muggle plugs are brilliant. The kitchen glows with nostalgia, every surface sticky with history. Ginny smiles at the warmth but feels the tug of ghosts. Fred's absence still bends the room's gravity slightly. George fills it with laughter, loud and defiant, his shop stories bubbling like potions. "Remember when you turned Percy's quill into a slug?" he asks. Ginny laughs. "I was 8. A prodigy," George replies solemnly. You can feel the love under the humor, the way Weasleys grieve through punchlines. Scholars of magical sociology have written extensively on intergenerational resilience among post-war families. They claim that households like the Weasleys develop micro-rituals to process collective trauma. Storytelling, humor, endless food. In a sense, dinner becomes group therapy disguised as roast chicken. Ginny once joked in an interview, "We don't bottle emotions, we marinate them." The quote made it into Witch Weekly's Top 10 Inspiring Wizarding Moms list, which she found both flattering and slightly insulting. Inspiration, after all, is just a polite synonym for exhaustion. Teaching, however, remains her sanctuary. After retiring from professional Quidditch, she takes a position coaching at Hogwarts. Professor Potter doesn't stick. Students still call her Weasley with affectionate awe. The first day back, she walks through the Great Hall and catches her reflection in the polished floor. Older, sure, but steadier. Some students whisper, starstruck. Others, oblivious to her legend, just want to fly better. She loves the oblivious ones most. Legends, she tells her first class, are just people whose mistakes got published. Laughter breaks the ice and suddenly the castle feels alive again. Less museum, more possibility. Her lessons mix precision with irreverence. Quidditch, she says, is 90% instinct and 10% pretending you planned that. Students adore her. Even the Slytherins, skeptical at first, respect her bluntness. "You can hate me," she tells them, "but you'll still pass if you fly well." It's oddly empowering. She keeps her classroom light, but occasionally, when the wind rattles the windows during storms, she pauses mid-sentence. There's still a shadow in her somewhere, not of fear, but of awareness. Darkness isn't something she banishes. It's something she's befriended. One rainy evening, she catches a student crying alone in the stands. The girl clutches a small, enchanted journal, trembling. "It talks to me," she whispers. Ginny's blood freezes for half a heartbeat. "Does it talk back?" she asks softly. The girl nods. Without hesitation, Ginny takes the journal, murmurs a detection charm, and feels only weak enchantment. Nothing dark, just loneliness amplified by magic. "It's not cursed," she says gently. just chatty. She sits beside the girl. Write something good in it then. Magic likes manners. It's such a simple line, but it saves the child from months of fear. Ginny doesn't mention how her own story began the same way, with something that listened too well. Some legacies are better rewritten quietly. Her reputation as the whisper teacher grows. Students come to her not just for flight lessons, but for advice. You don't have to prove you're brave, she tells one boy who's terrified of exams. You just have to show up scared. Another time, she scribbles on the blackboard, "Fear is boring." It's repetitive, she explains. Find something more interesting to do with your panic. The room laughs, but years later, her students still quote her words like spells. One even turns the phrase into a tattoo, claiming it helps more than Felix Felicis. Somewhere, she's both horrified and proud. Outside the classroom, she's asked to give guest lectures on the psychology of courage. At one of them, a ministry official praises her for being a symbol of post-war healing. She thanks him, then adds, "Healing isn't a ceremony, it's housework." The audience laughs nervously, unsure if she's joking. She isn't. She just doesn't like applause for things everyone has to do eventually. In her private life, things stay ordinary in the best possible way. Sundays at the Burrow remain chaotic. Birthdays involve too many candles and not enough oxygen. Harry still forgets where he left his glasses. Hermione still corrects him mid-sentence. Life continues, and Ginny allows it to. Occasionally late at night, she steps outside to watch her children's brooms arc across the sky like fireflies. She smiles, but never warns them to come down. Fear, she knows, is something they must negotiate with themselves. Years later, when her eldest leaves for Hogwarts, Ginny writes him a note. It's short. You don't have to be exceptional to be loved. Just curious. It becomes his talisman, tucked inside his trunk beside a chocolate frog card. She laughs at the thought of future generations collecting her face on those cards, famous survivors of the Second War, and groans. "Please, let me look dignified," she mutters. Time, as always, moves on. Her students graduate, her children grow, and her hair gains streaks of silver that shimmer like truth in sunlight. Reporters ask about aging. She replies, "I prefer continuity." A wizarding historian once claimed that Ginny's real contribution wasn't her heroism, but her normalization of it, that she taught the magical world how to live after legend. You think that's probably right. In every generation, she becomes a quiet benchmark of what courage looks like when it stops trying to impress anyone. One evening, as she packs up her office, she finds a note slipped under her door. "Thank you for teaching us to laugh at fear." No signature, just neat handwriting and a small doodle of a broom. She tucks it into her coat pocket. Maybe someday she'll frame it. For now, it's enough just to know that the echo of her laughter, once armor, now melody, has become someone else's spell against darkness. The castle lights flicker, signaling curfew. Ginny locks her office, steps into the corridor, and feels Hogwarts breathing around her, warm and alive. She runs her hand along the stone wall, whispering, "Still here, aren't we?" The wall hums back in silence that feels like affection. You realize that the weight of names has finally lifted. She isn't the girl who was cursed, the wife of the chosen one, or the mother of heroes. She's just Ginny, teacher, survivor, occasional menace to librarians, and that, in the end, might be the greatest spell of all. It begins on a fog-heavy morning when the air itself feels like a held breath. You're back at Hogwarts, though this time it isn't for teaching or research. Ginny Weasley stands by the lake, wand in hand, the mist rising around her like unformed memory. The castle looms behind her, softer now, as if its edges have learned humility. In her pocket rests the shard of Tom Riddle's diary she found years ago, still harmless, still faintly humming, like a heart that refuses to admit it stopped beating. The Ministry has decided to finally destroy it, for symbolic closure, as one official put it. Ginny volunteered before anyone could ask. "It started with me," she said. "It can end with me." She kneels on the damp grass, placing the fragment on a flat stone. The surface of the black lake is perfectly still, reflecting a clouded sky that looks more memory than weather. You can hear the faint sounds of morning, the flapping of owl wings, the creak of castle gates, the distant chatter of students who have no idea what's ending here. She draws her wand, tracing a small circle of light around the shard. The runes glow faint blue, a color that always seems to belong to the space between forgiveness and forgetting. "You've had a long run," she murmurs, "but stories need endings." The spell she uses is old, one of those ancient, half-remembered cleansing charms that blend fire, water, and will. It doesn't destroy, it releases. Historians would argue about semantics, of course, because that's what historians do. But Ginny knows the difference between erasure and peace. She whispers the incantation, and the shard begins to tremble, lines of black ink curling upward like smoke, trying to become words again. For a fleeting second, she swears she hears a voice, young, confident, and lonely all at once. "Why did you trust me?" it asks. She doesn't flinch. "Because I wanted to be seen," she replies softly, "and you offered attention when I didn't know the difference." The shard disintegrates slowly, unraveling into light rather than ash. It's quieter than she expected. No dramatic burst, no echoing explosion, just a sigh, like the last page of a book closing. You almost laugh at the irony, a piece of dark magic ending with grace. The air smells faintly of ink and rain. She feels no triumph, no grief, just relief that the silence afterward belongs entirely to her. Somewhere behind her, a soft rustle. Professor Longbottom, now head of herbology, has been standing at a distance, watching. "You didn't have to do that alone," he says. "I wasn't alone," she answers, eyes still on the dissolving light. "I had the past watching." Later that day, she deposits the wand fragment, now nothing but harmless dust, into a glass vial labeled Resolved Artifact. The Hogwarts archivist thanks her formally. "For history," he says. "No," she replies, "for closure." Then she smiles, a small, tired smile that manages to carry every year between 11 and now. That night, at dinner in the Great Hall, she doesn't mention it. She laughs with colleagues, critiques the soup, argues playfully about Quidditch rules. Only when everyone's gone does she sit back and whisper to the empty room, "You see, Tom, even your ending had good manners." There's a quiet satisfaction in watching a curse fade into routine paperwork. It feels almost bureaucratic, which is oddly comforting. In her later years, she will describe this day as the moment the story stopped being mine. It belongs now to time, to historians, to curious students writing essays on Horcrux ethics. She doesn't mind. You can't live forever inside a legend. You have to evict yourself eventually. Scholars continue to debate the metaphysics of the diary's destruction, whether fragments of Voldemort's consciousness could persist in the residue of magic. One particularly imaginative theorist even suggested that part of his essence was absorbed into Ginny's own magic, explaining her unusual strength. She dismissed the claim with characteristic wit. "If that's true, then I've been charging rent for years." The truth is simpler and far less glamorous. Trauma, once understood, loses its supernatural quality. It becomes human, and humans can heal. That, more than any incantation, is the real spell she's been casting all along. You realize how fitting it is that the diary's final dissolution required no heroics, just attention, honesty, and a little patience. Historians may crave fireworks, but healing prefers quiet rooms. After the ritual, Ginny walks the grounds one last time before term ends. The Forbidden Forest murmurs softly, leaves whispering like old friends exchanging secrets. She pauses by Hagrid's empty hut, still kept in perfect condition, flowers blooming where pumpkins once grew. "You'd laugh at me," she says aloud, "doing emotional magic before breakfast." The wind answers with a warm rustle, which she takes as agreement. Back inside, she passes through the Gryffindor common room, now inhabited by a new generation of restless dreamers. A first-year girl, freckles and all, looks up from her essay and asks, Professor Weasley, is it true you once saved the school? Ginny chuckles. It's true I once almost destroyed it, she says lightly. Saving came later. The girl's eyes widen, uncertain whether to laugh. Don't worry, Ginny adds. It's a long story, and you'll hear the better version in History of Magic. Humor, even now, her gentlest weapon. That night, in her quarters, she opens her old journal. Not the cursed one, not even her teenage one, but a fresh, clean volume. On the first page she writes, "There's no such thing as final closure, only quieter echoes." Then she adds in smaller script, "And laughter helps." The quill hovers for a moment before she signs her name, just Ginny. No titles, no last name. For the first time, it feels enough. Outside, the sky clears. The moon rises above the castle, pale and steady. Somewhere in the lake below, the last ripples of her spell fade into stillness. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the castle hum, not in warning this time, but in contentment. It has watched one of its ghosts finally lay another to rest. You think of all the stories contained within these walls, and how few ever truly end. Ginny closes the journal, sets it on the windowsill, and leans into the night breeze. "Good night," she whispers, "to the castle, to the diary, to the girl she used to be." Then she smiles, a smile without audience or armor, and extinguishes the lamp. The tower remains illuminated for a moment longer, then goes dark. In the silence that follows, Hogwarts itself seems to exhale. The chamber is quiet. The ghosts have gone to sleep. And above it all, the stars look down, unblinking, eternal, indifferent, and somehow merciful. The years pass gently now, like pages turning in a book that no longer hurries toward its ending. The world outside Hogwarts softens, its wars and prophecies reduced to bedtime stories told to children who no longer know fear by name. Ginny Weasley lives quietly in Devon, in a cottage surrounded by hedges so wild they look enchanted, though she insists they're just lazy gardening. The air smells of rosemary and old wood, the scent of contentment disguised as domestic chaos. Inside, there are too many books, too many brooms, and far too many shoes by the door. It's a beautiful mess, the kind you can only build after surviving everything else. You find her sitting by the window, a cup of tea steaming beside her, watching the rain slide down the glass. She's in her 60s now, her hair streaked with silver that catches light like woven moonlight. The lines on her face are not aged so much as punctuation marks. Every laugh, every argument, every triumph properly noted. The owl post still comes every morning, though most letters now are from students grown into adults, thanking her for lessons they didn't realize they were learning at the time. One writes, "You taught us how to lose without calling it failure." Another says, "Fear is boring. I still tell myself that before every big meeting, she keeps them all in a small chest under the stairs, tied with red ribbon. Memory has become her favorite form of decoration. The wizarding world has changed. Magic feels calmer, less desperate. The Ministry, remarkably, has discovered empathy, though still not punctuality. Dark artifacts are now kept under stricter watch, no cursed jewelry left lying around for curious schoolchildren. There's even a museum exhibit dedicated to the Horcrux era, where glass cases display objects once soaked in fear. Ginny has visited exactly once. She stood before the display labeled Tom Riddle's Diary, reconstructed illustration, and read the placard that called it an instrument of innocence betrayed. Then she quietly told the curator, "It wasn't innocence, it was curiosity, and that's not a sin." They changed the text the next day. She laughed for hours. Her days follow an unremarkable rhythm now. Tea at dawn, walks by the sea, occasional owl deliveries from her children. Harry, ever restless, still insists on calling her from the Auror office, half to report, half to hear her voice. "You're still saving the world?" she teases. "Only in paperwork," he sighs. She smiles, listening to the exhaustion in his voice, the same exhaustion that once came from battles, now from bureaucracy. "At least the paperwork doesn't talk back," she says, and he chuckles, though they both know she's lying. Paperwork always talks back. Their love has aged into friendship, patience, and shared tea instead of heroics. When her grandchildren visit, the house fills with chaos again, the kind that breaks vases and hearts open at once. They climb her shelves, steal her wands, and demand bedtime stories about dragons and heroes. She tells them the sanitized versions, of course. No possession, no guilt, just a brave young witch who once had to outsmart a monster with manners. Did she win? They always ask. No, she replies with a wink. She just learned better stories. That answer satisfies them every time. Children, after all, understand wisdom faster than adults do. Sometimes she writes, not for fame anymore, but for clarity. Short essays about magic, emotion, and humor as survival. One of them, The Uses of Laughter in Times of Curse, becomes unexpectedly popular among healers and educators. People think jokes are escape, she says in one lecture, but they're actually anchors. Laughter keeps you from floating away when grief tries to carry you off. The audience laughs, half in understanding, half in awe of her calm. She ends the talk with a shrug, and it's cheaper than therapy. As night settles, the cottage glows with the warm gold of lamplight. You can hear the faint hum of old magic, not dangerous, just atmospheric, like a house sighing in its sleep. Ginny sits at her writing desk, where the window opens to the sound of distant waves. Her quill hovers over a fresh page. This time, she isn't writing reports or essays, just a letter. "Dear Hogwarts," she begins, "thank you for everything you taught me, especially what you didn't mean to." She pauses, smiles, and continues. "You were the scariest teacher I ever had, and somehow still my favorite." Outside, the rain slows to a mist. The moon peers through the clouds, unbothered and bright. She seals the letter with wax and sets it on the sill. In the morning, an owl will take it back to the castle, where perhaps some archivist will file it away, not realizing it's less a letter and more a benediction. Later that night, when the cottage grows quiet, she steps outside. The air is cool, clean, and filled with the hum of cicadas. The stars above her feel closer than they used to, less like mysteries, more like old companions. She walks to the edge of her garden, where an apple tree bends under its own weight. "You made it," she whispers to the tree, though maybe she's talking to herself. A small, deliberate smile spreads across her face. We all did. Somewhere far away, in the castle she once feared, a first-year student opens a new diary, empty and harmless. They'll fill it with doodles, secrets, dreams, because no one remembers now that ink can bite. And maybe that's the final victory, the ordinary returned. The curse forgotten, not out of neglect, but out of peace. Ginny stands there for a long time, watching the stars flicker. She thinks of everyone she's known, the living, the lost, the ones who stayed behind in memory. Fred, laughing somewhere. Dumbledore, probably still cryptic. Tom Riddle, finally mute. She doesn't forgive him exactly. There's nothing left to forgive. She just refuses to give him another thought. That, she decides, is the real spell that broke him. Back inside, she blows out the candles one by one. Each flame dies with a soft exhale, leaving trails of smoke that twist like gentle ghosts. She doesn't rush them. She's learned to let endings take their time. Finally, the room settles into darkness, lit only by the moon spilling through the window. She sits on the edge of her bed, the wooden floor cool beneath her feet, and listens to the rhythm of her own breathing, steady, calm, unapologetically alive. In the final pages of her journal, she writes, "Magic isn't about power. It's about memory. The way light remembers the shape of what it touches." She closes the book, slides it into a drawer, and laughs softly. "Bit dramatic," she mutters to herself. Then, after a pause, she adds, "but accurate." The wind brushes against the window pane, the house creaks, and somewhere in the distance, an owl calls into the dark. It's the same sound she heard as a girl, lying awake in Gryffindor Tower, dreaming of the world she'd one day face. Only now, the sound doesn't promise danger. It promises sleep. You close your eyes with her. The rain begins again, faint and steady, like an old lullaby that refuses to stop caring. The air grows heavier, warmer, kinder. You can almost feel the magic settling, no longer pulsing, no longer restless, just existing quietly, like breath after laughter. Ginny's story doesn't end here. It simply drifts into peace. The candlelight memory fades, leaving only the hum of a world that's learned to forgive itself. Hogwarts sleeps. The chamber sleeps. And in a small cottage by the sea, a woman dreams, not of monsters, but of sunlight, broomsticks, and the sound of children laughing somewhere far away. When dawn finally touches the horizon, it feels less like a beginning and more like understanding. The shadows of Ginny Weasley have finally come to rest. Morning slips through the curtains, soft and gold, the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. The kettle hums, the sea murmurs in the distance, and Ginny Weasley, no titles, no history attached, opens her eyes to another ordinary day. She sits at the window, tea in hand, and watches the world breathe. There's no prophecy left to chase, no curse to outwit, only sunlight on wet leaves and the quiet creak of an old chair that has listened to more wisdom than any wand. You realize this is what all stories try to reach, not glory, not redemption, but the fragile beauty of enough. Magic still hums faintly in the corners, old spells that keep the house warm, a clock that sighs when Harry's late. But it's no longer a force of fear or grandeur. It's simply part of living, like laughter or memory. Somewhere far away at Hogwarts, students wake to the sound of bells, unaware that the calm in the stones beneath their feet began with one girl who survived and refused to stay silent. The castle keeps her name in its heartbeat, soft and steady. Ginny closes her eyes, listening to the wind brush the window. For a moment, she could almost swear she hears the faint, amused voice of the castle whispering, "Well done." She smiles, not the brave smile of a survivor, but the easy one of someone who's finally home. The sea continues its eternal conversation with the shore, the tea grows cold, and somewhere, a quill stops writing because there's nothing left to add.